And it kind of looks like not only has the United States abandoned Ukraine, but it kind of looks like the United States has switched sides and has joined with Russia. And even beyond that, we saw that the United States was now interfering in UN language to mark the third anniversary of the invasion by trying to delete wording to the effect that Russia was the aggressor. We saw the U.S. not supporting anymore the international prosecutions of Russia for war crimes. It's really a tectonic shift.
So, Bill, welcome back to the show. The last time I spoke with you, we actually had to slightly interrupt our interview because JD Vance took the stage at the Munich Security Council and made that rather extraordinary speech. Just some reflections on what's been an extraordinary sort of, 9 days for geopolitics.
Yeah, that was that exact moment was the moment that everything sort of became clear that prior to that we were I think the world was sort of hoping and praying and thinking that Donald Trump would support Ukraine, would be tough on Russia, and that peace and stability in our part of the world would continue, and perhaps Ukraine would be able to negotiate their own peace on their own terms. And that was the moment when it all became clear that that wasn't going to happen. And what he said in very simple terms was, what he didn't say was anything about Russia and Ukraine, which is what the whole world was working on and thinking about at that moment at the Munich Security Conference. And then what he did say was that there was something wrong with us, something wrong with Britain, with Germany, with Romania, that we have some terrible problems, and that we have oppression here, and it's almost Soviet. And that was the moment that everything kind of changed. And then of course after that, the most extraordinary things happened. We had Donald Trump blaming the war in Ukraine on the Ukrainians. We had Donald Trump claiming that Vladimir Zelensky was a dictator, claiming that he had a 4% approval rating, which is totally untrue. And it kind of looks like not only has the United States abandoned Ukraine, but it kind of looks like the United States has switched sides and has joined with Russia. And even beyond that, we saw that the United States was now interfering in UN language to mark the third anniversary of the invasion by trying to delete wording to the effect that Russia was the aggressor. We saw the U.S. not supporting anymore the international prosecutions of Russia for war crimes. It's really a tectonic shift in a matter of a week or 9 days, and
Yeah.
we don't know where it's going to go, but it's pretty remarkable.
It really is. I mean, I think everybody's head is spinning and still just really trying to sort of process, as you say, this incredible sort of shift, this potentially kind of era defining shift. Now, Donald Trump has many things. Donald Trump has been saying he's now saying that he wants the return of aid money given to Ukraine, and he's pushing for a deal which gives America access to Ukraine's minerals. What do you make of that?
Well, it's completely unbelievable. So Ukraine is the victim, Putin is the aggressor. Donald Trump is asking for the victim of this war to pay reparations, which they can't afford. He's not asking Vladimir Putin to pay any reparations. He's not asking Vladimir Putin for any money back. And furthermore, the money that he's asking for, which is some ungodly amount of money, he wants $500 billion when the amount of US aid is like for military is 100 billion, which by the way was given, not lent. There was no expectation that that money would ever be returned. But most importantly, he's not promising, peace and security. He's not saying that the United States will protect Ukraine if they get that money. And so I can't imagine under any scenario where the Ukrainians would agree to that. And I think he probably understands that too. And so I would imagine he's trying to set up sort of false narrative to say that Putin is ready to negotiate and the Ukrainians are not. They won't agree to my deal, and therefore we're cutting them off and cutting them loose. That's probably his strategy at this point, or something along those lines, because what he's
Yeah.
proposing is just such an indecent proposal. I can't imagine that anybody under any circumstances would have any reason to accept it.
And talk to us as well about your views on the kind of Elon Musk angle on this as well. I mean, he obviously he's amplifying a lot of the words that Donald Trump is saying. And we also understand that there's a possibility of cutting Ukraine off from Starlink, which of course is the vital satellite internet system. I mean, is that the kind of pressure that might persuade, or I say persuade, coerce President Zelensky into agreeing this minerals deal?
I don't see any circumstances whatsoever that he would agree this minerals deal. It doesn't make any sense for him. It's completely crazy. I don't see how it even has anything to do with peace. Donald Trump says he wants to resolve this war. Well, what's he doing to resolve this war? All he's trying to do is extract money from Ukraine in the future for what? What does Ukraine get in return? And so, I mean, thankfully, on the other side, and we don't see these, we don't have a sort of comparable to Donald Trump on our side of the Atlantic, but quietly the Europeans are waking up, and Britain, of course, is waking up to the fact that we're on our own out here, and we need to come up with some money to support Ukraine, and we're going to. There's been large numbers of military support numbers been thrown around. There's been discussions about what we do if the United States pulls out of NATO. Um, and this is all very unpleasant, but this is stuff that we have to start dealing with, and
Yeah.
we have to deal with it on a crisis and emergency basis, and it may take a little time. It's hard to gather up a consensus among dozens of countries, but we have an absolute necessity to do so.
And what do you think Keir Starmer can achieve when he meets Donald Trump next week?
Well, it's impossible to predict because Donald Trump is impossible to predict.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going into a very fraught situation because, on one hand, if he goes in and he says, Zelensky is not a dictator, Ukraine is not a victim, Putin is the bad guy, you need to do something different, then Donald Trump may say, oh, you know what, I'd forgotten about it, but we're going to slap UK with 25% tariffs. However, if Keir Starmer goes in and says, of course you're right, King Donald, everything you say is correct, then the British public will abandon him because Ukraine has overwhelming support. So he's really in a very tough position vis-a-vis America and vis-a-vis his the domestic voters in the UK.
And look, the UK has signaled that it wants to put more sanctions against Russia. I mean, when we hear more sanctions, it feels like it's kind of lost the impact because we think, gosh, so many sanctions have been put on Russia. Is there any more merit in putting more sanctions on Russia? Are these sanctions working? We've heard that the Russian economy is not doing so well. Is that a result of sanctions? Is it the right thing to put more sanctions on Russia?
Well, sanctions have been very helpful in degrading Russia's economic capacity. Um, uh, and there's one thing very important about any announcement from the UK about sanctions, which is very simply that by making an announcement about sanctioning Russia in this week, in this moment, is very symbolic. What it shows is that, we're on Ukraine's side, we're not on Putin's side. So that's helpful. And hopefully that's helpful in sending a message to our other allies and in our coalition of the willing. But the most important sanction that we could impose on Russia, which would actually change the game, make it a complete different situation, is if we, together with our allies in Europe, were to confiscate the $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that were frozen a week after the war started. If we did that, then Donald Trump's threats of cutting off military aid all of a sudden become nullified and void because Ukraine would still have money instead of coming from America, coming from Putin to pay for their defense. And that would be truly a game changer. And I very much hope, and I've been lobbying, when I was in Munich at the security conference, that's what I was working on with all the different foreign ministers, is to try to get consensus among European governments to do that. And I understand that perhaps today, after the German elections, that may actually be more of a reality.
And in terms of making that happen, and that sounds, eminently sensible to the untrained ear. What's the hold up on that? Where's the sort of resistance to it? Who has to, make the final decision on that? How does that decision get arrived at?
Well, so every time I've had this discussion, and I've had it often over the last 3 years, what happens is the politicians say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, Putin should pay for his own invasion. And then they throw it into the machine of the government bureaucracy. And some lawyer raises his hand and says, well, it's never been done before, or what about this and what about that? And then that's the kind of stuff that usually kills political initiatives. Except right now, we're at a point where the cost of not doing it is so magnificently high that if we don't come up with this money for Ukraine, Ukraine will fall. If Ukraine falls, we'll have a refugee crisis like we've never seen before coming from Ukraine. We'll have Putin challenging Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Those people will leave. NATO will be defunct, and we'll be in a whole new world. And so I think that it's dramatically in our interest to force the issue through the lawyers, using political will instead of just having somebody raise an objection and then putting the whole thing aside. And I think that that's where we are right now.
And so, when you have, you're obviously speaking a lot to sort of senior leaders. What's your message to them now? Just look, cut through the bureaucracy. If you want to make this happen, get onto it and make it happen.
I'm saying this is kind of like an airplane with a design fault, and I'm screaming and saying we have two choices. We can fix the design fault now, or we can wait for the airplane to crash. And that's where we are right now with this money as it relates to Ukraine. If we get Ukraine the money, they can live to fight another day. If they can fight another day, they can then determine when, where, and how they want to find their peace instead of being forced into a surrender by Donald Trump.
And I suppose, look, just to, I suppose, put a kind of a counter view, because there will be some of my listeners who take the view something had to be done. This forever war just couldn't keep going on. So many, people have lost their lives on both sides. I mean, I have Ukrainian friends who have been saying for a long time, we do want peace. We spoke to an opposition Ukrainian MP who said, look, we do want this war to end. Is there any argument, Bill Browder, that even though this is a very clumsy way to do it, perhaps Donald Trump is going to expedite this ceasefire and some kind of deal in a way that no other leader has been capable of doing?
Not on the terms that he's proposed. And by the way, if you were to speak to any Ukrainian, they would tell you they'd rather fight right now than have all their women raped, all their men murdered, and all their children kidnapped, which is what happens when they get occupied by Ukraine. And so I don't believe that there's any Ukrainian that thinks it's in their best interest to give up right now.
And look, how do you feel, Bill, and others like you? You're somebody who has spoken out so eloquently and movingly about your experience, and of course your friend and your business partner's experience of being oppressed by the Russian authorities, for people who have had to flee Russia. How does it feel for you that the world has just spun so quickly in these last 9 days, and Russia, who has, Putin and his acolytes, who've done terrible things to you, to your business partner, to so many other people, they've gone from being sort of pariah to now, the most powerful man on the planet is kind of in their corner. How does that make you and others feel?
Well, interestingly, nobody else has changed their views. So when I was in Munich, every member of Congress, whether they were Republican or Democrat, continues to believe that Putin is the criminal and Zelensky is the hero. American public opinion is dramatically of that in that position, and of course, public opinion all over the rest of the world, including people who are considering themselves Donald Trump's ally, like Maloney from Italy, um, continues to support Ukraine. And so I think that I don't feel, if I felt the whole world had changed, um, I would feel differently. But at the moment, I think that Donald Trump has gone out way over his skis on this thing, and this may be the thing that undoes him, in the sense that all of a sudden, it's one thing to say we want to, sort of subtly, we don't like this war anymore, we want to withdraw quietly. It's another thing to not just say that, but to say that Zelensky is the bad guy and Putin is the good guy. And I think that nobody can accept that, and no, and everybody is saying, well, who's this crazy man saying this idiotic, untrue stuff?
But Bill, that's what you may think, and that's what I may think, and that's what many of our listeners may think. And as you say, many people in the Republican Party might think that. But the world has changed so fundamentally with Donald Trump being leader of the free world, president of the United States. I mean, you said before, you're going to people like, I'm sure Keir Starmer has a very strong view privately about what he thinks about what Donald Trump is saying. But as you alluded to earlier, everybody now has to be walking on eggshells around Donald Trump. He has absolute dominance of his party. The Republican Party isn't the Republican Party anymore. It's the MAGA Party. He's now trying to sort of, spread his influence in Europe with, the AFD and others. You mentioned the prospects of tariffs. Isn't the reality that even though lots of people disagree with what he's saying, a lot of people are having to sort of go along with what he's saying, or not openly criticize what he's saying because he's so powerful?
That's true in the short term, but he's using all of his power right here and right now. And so if he chooses to use, and I say abuse, his power in this way, then everybody is going to disconnect, decouple, and find other ways of surviving. I mean, the world will go on. Europe will survive. We will find ways of managing. And if he becomes, part of the axis of evil, which I highly doubt, because I don't think the American people will accept that. But if he does, then we'll have to find a way to deal with it. I mean, America is actually a smaller country in terms of economy, in terms of population, than our collective Europe. I mean, we'll figure it out. I mean, it's entirely likely that we'll figure it out, because necessity is the mother of invention. We will figure out how to then, it may be costly. We may have to dramatically, dig into our pockets to create defense budgets to deal with this new world. All of our leaders may have to explain to everybody that we're going to have to pay more money. But the first and most important thing for any government is defense, is security. Before anything else, is to defend ourselves. And if we're in a new world, just like with COVID, we had a pandemic that could have killed everybody, and so we had to spend a lot of money to deal with it. This is a similar type of emergency, and we'll do what we have to do, and I'm sure that's what will happen.